The rain had begun before dusk and showed no intention of stopping. It fell in a steady, whispering sheet over the narrow London street, washing the world into shades of grey. By the time the police were called to number 17 Ashcroft Lane, the storm had erased all footprints, all trace of wreathing, except the mystery waiting behind a locked door. Mrs. Eleanor Graves was found seated upright at her writing desk, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap as though she had been expecting company. A single candle burned low beside her, its wax pooled like a frozen tear. There was no sign of struggle, no weapon in sight, no broken window, no forced entry. The door to the study had been locked from the inside, and Mrs. Graves was quite unmistakably dead. Inspector Hale stood in the center of the room, his coat damp from the rain, his sharp eyes moving from one detail to the next. The fireplace was cold. The windows were latched. The desk was orderly, save for a single sheet of paper resting in the center. It was not a confession, nor was it a farewell. It was a letter. Odd thing, Hale muttered, holding it carefully by the edges. No envelope, no signature, just this. He read it again, aloud this time, his voice low against the hush of the room. You must not trust him. By the time you read this, it will already be too late. A constable shifted uneasily by the door. Sounds like a warning, sir. Yes, Hale said slowly. A warning delivered too late. He placed the letter back exactly where it had been. The position of everything in the room had been carefully noted, sketched, and photographed. Yet nothing made sense. If the letter was meant for Mrs. Graves, then why was it still on her desk, unread? And if she had read it, why was there no reaction, no sign she had even attempted to escape whatever fate awaited her? The doctor cleared his throat. Poison, he said, fast-acting, likely ingested. No marks on the body, no indication of force. Suicide, the constable offered. Hale shook his head immediately. No poison found. No glass, no vial. Nothing she could have used. He gestured to the desk. And people don't write warnings to themselves. The rain tapped insistently against the windows, as though urging the room to give up its secrets. Who found her? Hale asked. The maid, sir. She says Mrs. Graves dismissed her early this evening. No visitors were expected. No visitors, Hale repeated, glancing at the locked door. And yet someone must have been here. Or something had been. His gaze returned to the letter. The handwriting was precise, controlled almost too careful. Not the hurried scrawl of panic, but the deliberate hand of someone who wanted every word to be understood. You must not trust him. A single word, and yet it opened 100 possibilities. A friend, a relative, a servant, or someone far more dangerous. Hale stepped closer to the desk, studying the arrangement once more. The chair was perfectly aligned. The ink bottle was closed. The pen rested beside it, untouched. It was as if Mrs. Graves had finished her evening correspondence and simply stopped existing, except for the letter. It did not belong. Everything else in the room spoke of routine, of order. The letter was the only intrusion, the only disruption in an otherwise controlled environment. Sir, the constable said hesitantly, there's something else. Hale turned. The postman came by earlier, the constable continued. He delivered a letter to this address. The maid mentioned it. Said it arrived after 6. Hale frowned. And the doctor estimates she died before 6, sir. For a moment, the only sound was the rain. Hale's eyes moved slowly back to the desk, to the letter, to the neat, unmoving figure of Mrs. Graves. A warning that arrived too late. Or perhaps a message meant for someone else entirely. Inspector Hale remained motionless for several seconds, his mind circling the same impossible conclusion, when a quiet, precise voice spoke from the doorway. It is often the smallest detail, mon ami, that arrives too late and yet exactly on time. Hale turned sharply. Standing just inside the threshold, impeccably dressed despite the rain, was Hercule Poirot. His polished shoes bore not a trace of mud, his moustache as immaculate as ever, his expression one of calm, almost polite curiosity. "Ah," Hale said, exhaling. "I was told you might come." Poirot inclined his head slightly, "and I was told there was a puzzle." Already, I see it is a most intriguing one. He stepped into the room without waiting for further invitation, his eyes moving not hurriedly like the others, but with a deliberate, almost surgical precision. He did not look first at the body. Instead, he studied the space between things, the distances, the symmetry, the silence of the room itself. A locked door, he murmured. A peaceful posture, no sign of distress. And yet death. His gaze finally settled on Mrs. Graves. She was not afraid when she died. That is most curious. Poison, Hale said. Fast-acting, no container found. Poirot moved closer to the desk but did not touch it. And the letter? Hale handed it to him carefully. Poirot read it once, then again. His eyes narrowed not in confusion but in interest. You must not trust him, he repeated softly. By the time you read this, it will already be too late. He glanced up. Tell me, Inspector, you believe this letter was written for the dead woman? It was on her desk, Hale replied. No one else was in the room. Poirot gave a small, almost indulgent smile. Ah, but that is not the same thing. He placed the letter back exactly as he had found it, aligning it with a care that bordered on ritual. Then, at last, he examined the desk more closely. The arrangement, he said. It is perfect. Too perfect. Hale frowned. She was known to be meticulous. Yes, Poirot agreed. But even the most meticulous of us leave behind the little imperfections, unconscious gestures. A pen slightly askew. A chair pushed back unevenly. Life, Inspector, is not symmetrical. He gestured lightly. And yet here, everything is. The constable shifted again. You think someone staged it? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he leaned slightly, his gaze drawn not to the obvious objects, but to something smaller, almost invisible, unless one were looking for it. A faint ring on the polished wood of the desk. He bent closer. A glass stood here, he said quietly. Hale stepped forward. We found no glass. Just so, Poirot replied. And yet the mark remains. Recently placed, recently removed. Hale's expression tightened. Then the poison was in the drink, most likely. Poirot straightened. But that is not the interesting part. He turned, his sharp eyes now scanning the rest of the room. They paused briefly at the fireplace, then the window, and finally the door. Tell me about the maid, he said. Hale gestured toward the hallway. She's waiting outside. Claims she left before 6, says Mrs. Graves dismissed her early. Poirot nodded slowly. And she seemed, how do you say, calm, shaken but cooperative. Of course. Poirot moved toward the door, then stopped abruptly. His gaze dropped to the floor just inside the threshold. There, he said softly. Hale followed his line of sight. At first he saw nothing. Then a tiny fragment, barely noticeable. A sliver of something pale against the dark wood. Poirot crouched and, with delicate fingers, picked it up. Paper, Hale said. Poirot shook his head faintly. Not ordinary paper. He turned it slightly toward the light. Thicker, textured, the kind used for envelopes. Hale's eyes flicked instantly back to the desk. But there was no envelope with the letter. Precisely. Poirot rose, holding the fragment between his fingers like a clue of great importance. The letter arrived, yes, but its envelope has vanished, and this is all that remains, Hale murmured. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Not all, I think. He turned toward the door again, then paused listening. Footsteps in the hallway, a hesitation. And then, just for the briefest moment, the faintest sound of a breath being held. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, he said softly. Now we begin to see. Not just what is missing, but who is afraid. The silence beyond the door broke at last with a soft, uncertain knock. Inspector Hale opened it abruptly. The maid stood there, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes flickering between him and Hercule Poirot. She seemed smaller up close, diminished by the weight of the moment. You wish to see me, sir? Yes, Hale said, stepping aside just enough for her to enter. This is Monsieur Poirot. Her gaze lingered on Poirot, uncertain, as though she could not decide whether he was a comfort or a threat. Poirot offered a slight bow. Mademoiselle, you must not be afraid. We ask only for the truth. It is the lies that create the difficulty. She swallowed. I've told everything already, sir. Then it will be easy to tell it once more, Poirot said gently. She nodded, though her fingers tightened further. Mrs. Graves dismissed me early. Around 5:30, I think. She said she had letters to write and did not wish to be disturbed, and this was unusual. Poirot asked. A little, sir. She kept very regular hours. Poirot's eyes flicked briefly to the perfectly arranged desk behind him. A lady of order. Hale stepped in. Did she receive any visitors before you left? No, sir. And the post? Poirot asked quietly. The maid hesitated. Hale noticed it instantly. Go on. There was a letter, she admitted. The postman brought it just before I left. At what time exactly? Poirot's voice was calm but precise. I cannot be sure. Perhaps 5:45. And what did you do with this letter? I brought it to her. She was here, at the desk. The maid gestured toward the room, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. She took it from me. I remember because she looked surprised. Surprised? Poirot echoed. Yes, sir. She turned it over in her hands, as though she did not recognize the sender. And did she open it? The maid hesitated just a fraction too long. I believe so, she said finally. Poirot did not respond at once. He merely inclined his head slightly, as though accepting the answer, though his eyes suggested otherwise. And after that, Hale pressed. I left, sir. I heard nothing more. Her voice faltered, and she glanced toward the body. Until this evening, Poirot gave her a small, reassuring nod. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. As she turned to leave, her steps were quick, almost eager. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Hale exhaled. Nervous, but that's to be expected. Poirot did not answer. His gaze remained fixed on the door for a moment longer. She lies, he said quietly. Hale looked at him sharply. About what? About the letter being opened. Hale frowned. You're certain? Poirot gestured lightly toward the desk. The letter lies flat. Too flat. If it had been opened, handled, read in haste or surprise, there would be the the slight curl, the displacement. Instead, it rests as though it has been placed, not used. Hale's expression darkened. Then she never read it. Or she never had the chance, Poirot corrected. A second knock came, firmer this time. Enter, Hale called. The postman stepped in, cap in hand, his expression uneasy but composed. He was a sturdy man, practical, the kind who dealt in routine and expected the world to behave accordingly. You wanted to see me, sir? Yes, Hale said. About the letter you delivered this evening? The man nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Just the one. Nothing unusual. Poirot stepped forward slightly. You are certain of that, monsieur? Nothing unusual. The postman hesitated, then shrugged. Well, now that you mention it, sir. The address was handwritten, not typed, like most letters these days. Ah, Poirot said softly. And the handwriting, did it strike you as familiar? No, sir. But it was neat, careful. Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. Careful, yes. Hale crossed his arms. And the time? 5:40, sir. I remember because I was running a bit late on my route. Hale glanced at Poirot. That puts the letter after the estimated time of death. Indeed, Poirot murmured. The postman shifted slightly. There's something else, sir. I didn't think it mattered, but what is it? Hale asked. The envelope, the man said. It was already slightly torn. At the corner, Poirot's gaze sharpened instantly. Torn? Yes, sir, just a little. Like it had caught on something. Slowly, Poirot reached into his pocket and withdrew the tiny fragment he had found near the door. He held it up, aligning it with the postman's description. A corner, he said softly. The room seemed to tighten around them. Hale spoke first. If the envelope was torn before delivery, then someone else handled it. Poirot finished. The postman nodded uncertainly. I suppose so, sir. Poirot turned slightly, his mind already moving ahead. Or someone wished us to believe that. Hale's brow furrowed. You think the letter never came through the post at all? Poirot smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. I think, Inspector, he said, that every person in this house has told us the truth. He paused, his eyes drifting once more toward the closed door where the maid had stood. But not the same truth. Inspector Hale remained silent for a moment after the postman left, his gaze fixed on the letter as though it might rearrange itself into something comprehensible. But it lay there, unchanged, calm, deliberate, and entirely out of place. Behind him, Hercule Poirot moved slowly about the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his steps measured. He was no longer looking for what was obvious. Instead, he seemed to be assembling something invisible threads of thought that only he could see. "Let us consider," Poirot said at last, his tone light but precise, "the possibilities that present themselves. We have a woman who dies quietly, without struggle. A poison administered in a drink that vanishes. A letter that warns of danger, yet arrives too later appears to." Hale exhaled. "And a house with no intruder." "Ah," Poirot said softly, raising a finger. "That is what we are meant to believe." Hale frowned. "You think someone inside the house is responsible?" "I think," Poirot corrected, "that everyone inside the house has something to hide." He turned slightly. "Tell me, Inspector Maid, how long has she been in service here?" "Nearly a year. Reliable by all accounts." "And yet she lies about the letter," Poirot said. "Why?" "Not to conceal the murder that would require a boldness she does not possess, but to conceal something smaller and therefore more dangerous." Hale crossed his arms. "Fear, perhaps. Oui, but fear of what?" Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Not of the police. No, her fear is more immediate, more personnel." He moved toward the fireplace now, though it had not been used. His gaze lingered on the mantel, on a framed photograph of Mrs. Graves standing beside a mantle, composed, his expression distant. "Her husband?" Poirot asked. "Deceased," Hale replied. "Some years ago, left her a considerable fortune." Poirot nodded slowly. "And who inherits now?" Hale hesitated. "A nephew, Charles Graves. He arrived earlier this evening after the body was discovered." "Convenient," Poirot murmured. Hale gave a short nod. "He claims he was out of town until this afternoon. Says he came straight here when he received word of his aunt's condition." Poirot's gaze lingered on the photograph. "And his manner?" "Calm," Hale said. "Too calm, perhaps. But grief takes many forms." "Indeed it does," Poirot said quietly. "Sometimes it takes the form of relief." Hale's eyes narrowed. "You think he had reason to want her dead?" "A fortune is always a reason," Poirot replied. "But it is rarely the only one." He turned back toward the desk, his mind clearly moving between pieces. "And the Maidish fears something personal. Perhaps her position or her past." Hale looked at him. "You think she's connected to the nephew?" Poirot gave a faint smile. "In these houses, Inspector, connections are like shadows. They are always present, but rarely where you expect them." He paused, then added, "And then we have the letter." Hale gestured toward it. "A warning about him. That points to the nephew as well." "Perhaps," Poirot said. "But consider this. If the letter truly came from an outsider Simeone wishing to warn Mrs. Graveston, why is it so theatrical?" Hale frowned. "Theatrical?" The wording, Poirot explained. "By the time you read this, it will already be too late. It is not merely a warning, it is a statement, a certainty." His gaze sharpened, almost as though the writer knew exactly when the danger would come. Hale was silent. "And if that is so," Poirot continued, "then the letter is not a warning at all." "What is it then?" Hale asked. Poirot's voice softened. "A performance." The word lingered in the room. Hale glanced again at the desk, at the body, at the unnatural stillness of everything. "You're saying the letter was meant to be found?" "Oui, and meant to mislead." Hale shook his head slightly. "But that doesn't explain the timing. If she died before the letter arrived," Poirot raised a finger again, "unless the letter did not arrive after her death." Hale looked at him sharply. "But the postman delivered something," Poirot interrupted gently. "Yes, but we assume it was this letter. We assume the sequence. We assume the truth, because it is convenient. He stepped closer to Hale, his voice lowering. But what if the letter was already here? Hale's breath caught slightly. And what if, Poirot continued, the delivery we speak of was merely a confirmation, a signal that the plan had succeeded? The room seemed to grow colder. Hale spoke slowly now. Then the murder wasn't just planned. It was coordinated. Poirot inclined his head. A web, Inspector, he said softly. Of greed, of fear, of quiet resentments long buried. Each thread alone is harmless. But together, his gaze moved once more to the door. Ah! They form a trap from which there is no escape. The weight of Poirot's words had barely settled when the door opened once more this time with urgency. A constable stepped in, breath slightly uneven. Inspector Sear, we've found something. Hale turned immediately. What is it? In the back corridor, near the servants' entrance. He hesitated, then added, a glass, tucked behind a storage cabinet. Hale's expression sharpened. Bring it here. Moments later, it was placed carefully on the desk, beside the letter. The glass was simple, unremarkable but not clean. A faint residue clung to the inside, barely visible unless one knew to look for it. Poison? Hale asked. The doctor, who had returned at once, leaned in. It's possible. I'll need to test it, but he nodded slowly. Yes, this could be it. Hale exhaled, a sense of movement finally breaking through the stagnation of the case. So she was given the drink, and the glass hidden afterward. Hidden, Hercule Poirot repeated softly. The constable shifted. There's more, sir. We questioned the maid again. Hale's eyes flicked up. And? She admitted she returned to the corridor after leaving. Said she forgot something. That's when she saw the glass, and panicked. She hid it. Why? Hale demanded. The constable hesitated. She says she thought she'd be blamed, that it would look as though she served the drink. Hale's jaw tightened. And the letter? She insists she gave it to Mrs. Graves, sir. But? He glanced briefly at Poirot. Her story changed slightly. She now says Mrs. Graves didn't open it immediately. Just placed it on the desk. Hale let out a sharp breath. So the maid lies, hides evidence, and returns to the scene after the fact. And fears being blamed, Poirot added quietly. Hale nodded, already moving toward a conclusion. It fits. She brings the letter, serves the drink. Something goes wrong, panic sets in. She hides the glass, tries to cover her tracks. The doctor straightened. If the poison is confirmed, that would be enough. Hale turned decisively. Bring her in. The maid was brought back, her composure far more fragile now. Her eyes darted nervously, her hands trembling. I didn't mean to hide it, sir, she said quickly. I was afraid you should have told us the truth from the beginning. Hale cut in. You served Mrs. Graves a drink. What was in it? Nothing, sir. Just what she always takes, and yet she is dead, Hale said sharply. And you concealed the only evidence of how it happened. Her voice broke. I didn't poison her. I swear it. Hale's expression remained hard. Then who did? I don't know. Convenient, Hale said coldly. There was a pause, a heavy, suffocating pause in which the room seemed to hold its breath. Then Hale spoke again, quieter now, but with finality. You're under arrest. The maid let out a small, strangled sound as the constable stepped forward. She did not resist, but her ice-wide, desperate flicked once toward Poirot, as though pleading for something he had not yet given. She was led away. The door closed. Silence returned. Inspector Hale exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. It's not perfect, he admitted, glancing at the desk, but it's enough. Motive a fear of losing her position. Opportunitish was alone with the victim. And now evidence. He turned to Poirot. What do you think? Poirot had not moved. His gaze rested not on the door where the maid had exited, nor on the glass, nor even on the letter. Instead, it lingered on the faint ring on the desk, the mark where the glass had once stood. Mon ami, he said softly, tell Muhan the maid hid the glass. Why did she not wipe the desk? Hale frowned. Why? The ring, Poirot said, gesturing lightly. It remains. A careless omission, or a deliberate one. Hale hesitated. She was panicked. She didn't think of it. Perhaps, Poirot said, but his tone carried doubt. He turned slowly, his eyes now moving toward the photograph on the mantel, then to the door, then back to the letter. Everything, it seemed, was still slightly out of place. "The solution is elegant," Poirot continued quietly. "Almost too elegant." Hale's expression hardened slightly. "You think we're wrong?" Poirot did not answer directly. Instead, he stepped closer to the desk and picked up the letter once more, holding it lightly between his fingers. "A crime such as this," he murmured, "is like a stage play. Each actor has their role. Each movement is rehearsed." He looked up, his eyes sharp now, but when the performance is too perfect, his gaze shifted almost imperceptibly toward the hallway beyond the closed door. "It is because the true author is still watching." Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked, soft, careful, as though someone very quietly had just begun to move. The faint creak of the floorboard did not escape Hercule Poirot. His head tilted ever so slightly, like a man listening not to sound, but to intention. Inspector Hale turned toward the door. "Did you hear that?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he set the letter back down with precise care, aligning it once more with the edges of the desk. "Inspector," he said quietly, "before we pursue footsteps, let us pursue something far more elusive." Hale frowned. "What could be more important than someone moving through the house right now?" "The reason they move at all," Poirot replied. There was something in his tone calm, yet insistent, that made Hale pause. The moment stretched, then passed. The constable was sent quietly into the corridor, but Poirot himself did not follow. Instead, he turned back to the room. "To understand this crime," he continued, "we must look not at what has happened, but at what has happened before." Hale crossed his arms. "You think this goes back further? I am certain of it." Poirot moved toward the mantelpiece again, his gaze returning to the photograph of Mrs. Graves and her late husband. This time, however, his attention shifted not to the figures themselves, but to the small inscription beneath the frame, a date and a place. "Tell me," Poirot said, without turning, "this house Mrs. Graves lived here long?" "Nearly 10 years," Hale replied. "After her husband died, she moved here permanently." "And before that?" Hale hesitated. "I believe they had an estate in the countryside. Sold it after his death." Poirot nodded slowly. "Sold or abandoned?" Hale frowned. "What difference does it make?" Poirot turned now, his eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes, Inspector, people do not leave places behind. They flee them." The implication lingered. Hale's expression sharpened. "You think something happened there?" "I think," Poirot said, "that the past has a way of returning, especially when it has been buried without resolution." At that moment, the constable returned. Cerno 1 in the corridor. Must have been the house settling. Poirot's gaze flicked briefly toward him, then away again. "Of course," but there was no conviction in the words. "Inspector," Poirot continued, "this nephew Charles Graves, you said he arrived after the body was found." "Yes, and his relationship with his aunt, distant. He visited occasionally. Financial matters mostly." Poirot nodded. "And the maid?" Hale sighed. "No known connection beyond employment." Poirot was silent for a moment. Then suddenly he moved swiftly now, with purpose. He crossed the room and opened a small cabinet near the writing desk. Inside were neatly arranged bundles of old letters, tied with ribbon, each stack labeled by date. "Personal correspondence," Hale said. "Oui," Poirot murmured. "The echoes of a life." He selected one bundle at random, untied it, and began to flip through the contents. His movements were no longer slow. They were searching, focused. Then he stopped. His fingers tightened slightly around one letter, older than the rest, its paper yellowed with time. "Ah," he said softly. Hale stepped closer. "What is it?" Poirot did not answer at once. He unfolded the letter carefully, his eyes scanning its contents with growing intensity. "This," he said at last, "is most illuminating." He handed it to Hale. The handwriting was different from the letter on the desk, less controlled, more urgent. The ink had faded, but the words were still clear enough. Hale read silently, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. "It's a threat," he said finally. "From years ago." Poirot inclined his head. not merely a threat, a warning. Hale looked up. It mentioned someone, a man named Edwin Marsh. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And what does it say of him? Hale read again, slower this time. He will not forget what was taken from him, nor what was done to him. If he returns, it will not be for forgiveness. The room seemed to tighten. Who is he? Hale asked. Poirot took the letter back gently. That, Inspector, is the question we should have asked at the very beginning. Hale's mind was already moving. You think this Marsh is connected to the murder? I think, Poirot said, that he is the shadow behind it. He turned the letter slightly, examining the handwriting more closely. And I think, he added quietly, that he has not been absent from this house as long as we believed. Hale's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting he's here, now. Poirot did not answer directly. Instead, he gestured toward the desk. The letter we found tonight speaks of him, he said. We assumed it referred to the nephew. But what if it does not? Hale felt a chill settle in. What if? Poirot continued, his voice low and precise. It refers to a man from the past, a man who has waited and planned, and finally returned to claim what he believes is his. Hale looked again at the old letter, then at the room around him. The perfectly arranged desk, the missing glass, the staged warning. And now, a name. Edwin Marsh, he repeated. Poirot's gaze lifted slowly toward the door, his eyes dark with realization. We, he said softly, and I think, Inspector. A pause, measured, deliberate. We have already met him. Inspector Hale stared at Poirot, the name still echoing in his mind. Met him? He repeated. That's impossible. We've accounted for everyone in the house. Hercule Poirot gave a faint, almost amused smile. Have we, Inspector? Or have we accounted only for who they claim to be? Hale opened his mouth to respond, but Poirot raised a hand gently. No, do not answer yet. Instead, let us test something. There was a shift in him, no subtle but unmistakable. The careful observer had become something else entirely, not merely a thinker, but a strategist. What kind of test? Hale asked. A simple one, Poirot replied. We shall allow the truth to reveal itself by inviting a lie. Before Hale could question further, Poirot moved toward the door. Have the nephew brought here, and if possible maid as well. The maid is under arrest, Hale said. All the better, Poirot replied calmly. Fear sharpens the mind, and sometimes loosens the tongue. Hale hesitated, then nodded. Within minutes, both were brought back, the maid pale and shaken, the nephew composed, though faint irritation flickered beneath his calm exterior. Charles Graves was a man of measured presence, his posture straight, his expression carefully neutral. Yet his eyes moved quickly, taking in the room, the desk, the letter, too quickly. You wish to see me again? He asked, his tone controlled. Poirot gestured lightly. Merci, monsieur. This will not take long. The maid stood apart, her hands clasped tightly, her gaze fixed downward. Poirot positioned himself between them, as though conducting a quiet experiment. You see before you, he began, gesturing to the desk, the scene of a crime that is almost perfect. The poison, the missing glass, the letter, each element placed with care. But perfection, as I have said, is often the greatest flaw. Neither spoke. Poirot continued, his tone light, almost conversational. We have discovered something new, a detail previously overlooked. Hale glanced at him sharply. This was new to him as well. Poirot reached into his pocket and withdrew the fragment of envelope. This, he said, holding it up, matches not only the torn envelope described by the postman, but also another piece we have just found. Ali, smooth, deliberate. Hale said nothing. We found it, Poirot continued, in the possession of someone in this house. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. The maid's breathing quickened. Charles Graves did not move. Poirot's eyes flicked between them, watching not their words, but their reactions. It is a curious thing, he went on, how such a small detail can betray a much larger truth. The envelope was handled before it arrived, torn deliberately. A signal, perhaps, between accomplices. The maid looked up suddenly. No, I didn't silence, Hale snapped. But Poirot raised a hand again. No, let her speak. Her voice trembled. I never touched any envelope like that. I swear it. Poirot watched her closely. Fear, yes, but confusion as well. Genuine. His gaze shifted to Charles. Perhaps, Poirot said softly, it was not the maid. Charles gave a faint, controlled smile. Inspector, surely we are not entertaining such theatrics. This is quite unnecessary. Unnecessary, Poirot echoed. Yes, the evidence is clear. The maid has already been found with the glass. Why complicate matters further? Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. He said, you prefer simplicity. Truth is often simple, Charles replied smoothly. Indeed, Poirot said, but lies must be carefully constructed. A flicker, so brief it might have been missed. But Poirot saw it. A tightening at the edge of Charles' jaw. A momentary stillness in his gaze. Poirot stepped closer. Tell me, monsieur, he said quietly, when you arrived this evening, you came directly here, yes? Of course. And you went where? To the study. Where else? Ah, Poirot said. And the letter you saw it then? Yes. Already opened? Charles hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. I believe so, he said. Poirot smiled, softly. Mon ami, he said, turning slightly toward Hale, we have a problem. Hale's eyes narrowed. What problem? Poirot's gaze remained fixed on Charles. The letter, he said gently, was never opened. The room seemed to tighten instantly. Charles said nothing. But something had changed, not in what he said, but in what he could no longer hide. A crack, small, precise, and impossible to repair. The silence that followed Poirot's words did not break, it fractured. Charles Graves did not protest. He did not argue. He simply stood there, his expression carefully reconstructed, as though that single misstep had never occurred. Inspector Hale took a step forward. You said the letter was already opened, but it wasn't. How did you know what was inside it? Charles gave a faint, dismissive breath. I assumed. A mistake, nothing more. A very precise mistake, Hale replied coldly. Before the tension could sharpen further, the door burst open. The constable who had been posted in the corridor stumbled in, his face pale. Serve evidence, Hale turned sharply. What about it? The glassets gone. For a moment, no one moved. Then Hale's voice cut through the room. What do you mean gone? It was just outside, sir. I placed it on the side table while I went to fetch the evidence bag. I was gone less than a minutuhan I came back. He swallowed. It was gone. The air in the room shifted instantly. Hercule Poirot did not look surprised. Instead, he closed his eyes briefly, as though confirming something he had already suspected. Of course, he murmured. Hale's frustration broke through. Of course. We just lost the only physical proof we had. Poirot opened his eyes again, calm as ever. Yes, and that is precisely why it has been taken. Hale turned to the constable. No one leaves this house. Search every room. Now. The constable nodded and rushed out, the urgency echoing down the corridor. The maid looked on the verge of collapse. I didn't take it, sir. I swear no one is accusing you yet, Hale said sharply, though his certainty had already begun to falter. Charles, however, remained composed, too composed. This is becoming rather absurd, he said quietly. First, accusations based on assumptions. Now, disappearing evidence. Perhaps the real issue is that there never was a clear case to begin with. Poirot turned his head slightly. On the contrary, monsieur, he said softly, the case is becoming clearer with every passing moment. Charles met his gaze. Is it? Yes. Poirot took a slow step forward, because now we see not only the crime, but the desperation behind it. Hale looked between them. You think he took it? I think, Poirot said, that someone realized the glass would betray them. Charles gave a faint smile. And yet you have no proof. None, Poirot agreed. Not anymore. The words hung there. Not anymore. Hale exhaled sharply. Without that glass, we can't confirm the poison. We can't tie it to anyone. This undermines everything. Poirot shook his head gently. No, Inspector, it reveals everything. Hale stared at him, How? Poirot turned slowly, his gaze sweeping across the room, the desk, the letter, the perfectly arranged scene. Consider, he said, the risk. To remove that glass now, at this stage, is to invite suspicion, to expose oneself. And yet it was done. Because it was dangerous, Hale said. Exactly. Poirot's eyes sharpened. More dangerous than anything else in this room. Hale frowned. But why? It only proves the method poison in a drink. Ah, Poirot said softly. But perhaps it proves something more. Charles shifted slightly. Barely noticeable, but enough. Poirot saw it. The glass, he continued, was hidden once already. By the maid, in fear. But now it is taken against his time with purpose. Hale's mind raced. You're saying the first hiding was panic. The second was calculation. Precisely. The room fell silent again, but it was no longer the same silence. This one carried weight. Hale looked at Charles. Where were you just now? In this house, Charles replied calmly. As you can see, that's not an answer. It is the only one you're entitled to. Hale stepped forward, anger rising. You Poirot raised a hand. Inspector, he said quietly, anger is a luxury we cannot afford. Not when the truth is so close. Hale forced himself to stop. Poirot turned his attention back to Charles. You see, monsieur, he said gently, you have made a mistake. Not in what you said, but in what you feared. Charles' expression did not change, but his silence did. It lingered just a fraction too long. Poirot's voice lowered. You feared the glass, not because it contained poison that we already know, but because it contained something else. A pause, measured, deliberate. Something that could not be explained away. Charles' eyes held his. But for the first time, there was something behind them. Not calm, not control, but calculation. And just beneath it, the first shadow of doubt. The silence had barely settled when a sound shattered it, not the cautious creak from before, but something sharper. A crash, glass breaking. From somewhere deeper in the house. Inspector Hale reacted instantly. Stay here, he ordered, already moving toward the door. But Hercule Poirot was already in motion. No, he said quietly, we go together. They stepped into the corridor, the air colder now, charged with something no one could yet name. The constable appeared at the far end, breathless, his face drained of color. Sir, downstairs in the study room off the hall. Hale did not wait. He pushed past, boots striking hard against the wooden floor, Poirot following with measured urgency, his eyes alert to every detail they passed. The door to the smaller study stood half open. Inside, a lamp had been knocked over, its light casting long, fractured shadows across the room. Papers were scattered across the floor. A chair lay on its side, and near the desk a man collapsed. Hale crossed the room in 2 strides and dropped to one knee. It's the postman. The man's cap had rolled away. A dark stain spread slowly across his shirt, just below the ribs. Alive? Hale demanded. The doctor, who had followed, bent down quickly. His hands moved with practiced speed. A pause. Then he's alive, but barely. The postman's eyes fluttered weakly, his breath shallow, uneven. His lips moved, but no sound came. Poirot stepped closer, crouching beside him. Mon ami, he said gently, you must try. Who did this? The man's gaze shifted, unfocused at first, then sharpened just enough. His hand trembled, lifting slightly, pointing, not at the door, not at the corridor, but toward the far side of the room, toward the desk. Poirot's eyes followed the gesture, and then he saw it. Resting on the desk, as though it had always been there, the glass, the missing glass. Hale rose sharply. How did it get here? The constable stammered. It wasn't here before, sir. I checked this room earlier. Poirot stood slowly, his gaze fixed on the glass. Of course it wasn't, he murmured. The postman let out a faint, broken breath. His hand fell back to the floor. The doctor shook his head grimly. He needs immediate attention. Get him out of here, Hale ordered. As the constable and doctor lifted the wounded man, Poirot stepped closer to the desk. The glass was no longer hidden, no longer forgotten. It had been returned, placed deliberately, like a message. Hale stared at it. This makes no sense. Why bring it back? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he examined the position, the angle, the light catching the faint residue along its rim. Then his gaze shifted slowly, deliberately to the doorway, where Charles Graves now stood, watching. "I heard the noise," Charles said calmly. "What's happened?" Hale's voice was sharp. "The postman's been attacked, and the missing evidence has reappeared." Charles' eyes flicked briefly to the glass, just for a moment, then back to Hale. "Convenient timing. Or deliberate timing," Poirot said softly. Charles met his gaze. "Are you suggesting I had something to do with this?" Poirot's expression did not change. "I am suggesting," he said, "that someone in this house is not merely covering their tracks, but actively rewriting the narrative." Hale gestured toward the glass. "This changes everything." "If the postman had it, if he was attacked for it, yes," Poirot said quietly. "Then he knew something." Hale's mind raced. "And now someone wants us to see it differently." "Exactly." The room seemed to close in again, but this time with a new intensity. This was no longer a matter of uncovering what had already happened. Someone was still moving, still acting, still ahead. Poirot's voice dropped, calm but edged with urgency. "We are no longer investigating a crime that is finished, Inspector." He looked once more at the glass, then at Charles, then toward the corridor beyond. "We are inside a crime that is still unfolding, and somewhere in the house unseen the next move was already being made." The silence had barely settled when a sound shattered it, not the cautious creak from before, but something sharper. A crash, glass breaking, from somewhere deeper in the house. Inspector Hale reacted instantly. "Stay here," he ordered, already moving toward the door. But Hercule Poirot was already in motion. "No," he said quietly. "We go together." They stepped into the corridor, the air colder now, charged with something no one could yet name. The constable appeared at the far end, breathless, his face drained of color. Sir Downstairs, the study room off the hall. Hale did not wait. He pushed past, boots striking hard against the wooden floor, Poirot following with measured urgency, his eyes alert to every detail they passed. The door to the smaller study stood half open. Inside, a lamp had been knocked over, its light casting long, fractured shadows across the room. Papers were scattered across the floor. A chair lay on its side, and near the desk a man collapsed. Hale crossed the room in 2 strides and dropped to one knee. "It's the postman." The man's cap had rolled away. A dark stain spread slowly across his shirt, just below the ribs. "Alive?" Hale demanded. The doctor, who had followed, bent down quickly. His hands moved with practiced speed. A pause. "Then he's alive, but barely." The postman's eyes fluttered weakly, his breath shallow, uneven. His lips moved, but no sound came. Poirot stepped closer, crouching beside him. "Mon ami," he said gently, "you must try. Who did this?" The man's gaze shifted, unfocused at first, then sharpened just enough. His hand trembled, lifting slightly, pointing not at the door, not at the corridor, but toward the far side of the room. Toward the desk. Poirot's eyes followed the gesture. And then he saw it. Resting on the desk, as though it had always been there. The glass. The missing glass. Hale rose sharply. "How did it get here?" the constable stammered. "It wasn't here before, sir. I checked this room earlier." Poirot stood slowly, his gaze fixed on the glass. "Of course it wasn't," he murmured. The postman let out a faint, broken breath. His hand fell back to the floor. The doctor shook his head grimly. "He needs immediate attention." "Get him out of here," Hale ordered. As the constable and doctor lifted the wounded man, Poirot stepped closer to the desk. The glass was no longer hidden, no longer forgotten. It had been returned, placed deliberately, like a message. Hale stared at it. "This makes no sense. Why bring it back?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he examined the position, the angle, the light catching the faint residue along its rim. Then his gaze shifted slowly, deliberately to the doorway, where Charles Graves now stood, watching. "I heard the noise," Charles said calmly. "What's happened?" Hale's voice was sharp. The postman's been attacked, and the missing evidence has reappeared. Charles' eyes flicked briefly to the glass, just for a moment. Then back to Hale. Convenient timing. Or deliberate timing, Poirot said softly. Charles met his gaze. Are you suggesting I had something to do with this? Poirot's expression did not change. I am suggesting, he said, that someone in this house is not merely covering their tracks, but actively rewriting the narrative. Hale gestured toward the glass. This changes everything. If the postman had it, if he was attacked for it, yes, Poirot said quietly. Then he knew something. Hale's mind raced, and now someone wants us to see it differently. Exactly. The rooms seemed to close in again, but this time with a new intensity. This was no longer a matter of uncovering what had already happened. Someone was still moving, still acting, still ahead. Poirot's voice dropped, calm but edged with urgency. We are no longer investigating a crime that is finished, Inspector. He looked once more at the glass, then at Charles, then toward the corridor beyond. We are inside a crime that is still unfolding, and somewhere in the house unseen the next move was already being made. The room held its breath long after the wounded postman had been carried away. The overturned chair, the scattered papers, the returned glass, all of it felt less like evidence and more like a message written in fragments. Inspector Hale stood rigid, his thoughts racing in too many directions at once. This is spiraling, he muttered. First the murder, then the missing evidence, now an attack. Whoever is behind this is no longer hiding, Hercule Poirot finished softly. Poirot stepped closer to the desk, his gaze fixed on the glass. He did not touch it. Not yet. Observe, Inspector, he said. The sequence is not random. It is deliberate. Hale ran a hand through his hair. Deliberate. It looks like chaos. Ah, Poirot said, a faint smile touching his lips, but chaos is often the most carefully constructed illusion. He bent slightly, examining the glass from different angles, his eyes narrowing with quiet intensity. It was hidden, he continued, then stolen, then returned. Each action carries risk. Each action draws attention. And yet... It continues, Hale frowned. So what's the purpose? Why not destroy it? Poirot straightened slowly. Because it is not meant to disappear, he said. It is meant to be seen. Hale stared at him. Zayn, yes, at the right moment, in the right place. Poirot's gaze shifted not to the glass, but to the desk beneath it, to the faint ring that had never quite matched its absence. And always, he added, in relation to something else. Hale followed his line of sight. The desk. Poirot nodded. The desk, the letter, the position of the body. Everything returns to this point. He turned slowly, his mind assembling the pieces now not as separate clues but as parts of a single design. The letter arrives too late, he said. The poison leaves no trace. The glass vanishes, then reappears. Each element contradicts the other. Each creates confusion. Hale's expression tightened. So the whole thing is staged. Oui, Poirot said, but not merely to mislead us about how the crime was committed. A pause, to mislead us about when. Hale blinked. Vain. Poirot's eyes sharpened. We have accepted a timeline, Inspector. The doctor estimates the time of death before 6. The postman delivers the letter after 6. Therefore, we conclude the letter arrived too late. Yes, Hale said. That's what we've been working with. Poirot stepped closer. And yet, he said quietly, everything we have seen depends on that assumption being true. Hale felt it thenly shift, the subtle, unsettling movement beneath the surface of the case. You think the time of death is wrong. I think, Poirot corrected, that the time of death has been made to appear wrong. Hale stared at him. That's not possible. The doctor works with what he sees. Poirot interrupted gently. But what if what he sees has been arranged? The room seemed to tilt slightly. Poirot's gaze moved back to the desk. To sit upright, composed, without disturbance, he continued. To appear as though one has died peacefully, at a specific moment, requires more than poison. Hale's voice dropped. You're saying she didn't die when we think she did. Poirot inclined his head. "And if that is true," he said, "then the letter does not arrive after the murder." He let the thought hang for just a fraction longer. But before it, silence. Heavy. Absolute. Hale's mind raced. Then the warning was real. "Perhaps," Poirot said. "Or perhaps it was part of the design from the beginning." He turned slowly, his eyes now moving toward the doorway where Charles Graves still stood. Watching. Always watching. "The key," Poirot continued, "has been before us from the start. Not hidden, not concealed. Simply misunderstood." Hale followed his gaze. "The letter?" he asked. Poirot shook his head slightly. "The behavior," he said. Hale frowned. "What do you mean?" Poirot's voice softened, but each word landed with precision. "Who insisted on simplicity? Who accepted the obvious solution too quickly? Who guided us gently, subtly toward the conclusion that the maid was guilty?" Hale's eyes shifted slowly toward Charles. "And who," Poirot added, "reacted not to the crime, but to the evidence?" The pattern was no longer scattered. It was converging. Every misplaced detail, every contradiction, every carefully timed action, all pointing not to chaos, but to control, and at its center a man who had never once appeared surprised. Poirot's gaze never wavered from Charles Graves. Every minute movement, every twitch of the eyes, every shallow breath seemed to speak in a language that only he could interpret. Hale, though tense and impatient, followed, sensing that the breakthrough they had been waiting for was imminent. "Tell me, monsieur," Poirot said softly, "when you arranged your arrival tonight, what were you thinking?" His tone was gentle, almost conversational, but beneath it lay an unrelenting precision. "Did you consider the timing of the letter, the glass, the postman? Or did you only concern yourself with appearances?" Charles' lips pressed together. He shifted his weight slightly, a barely noticeable motion, but enough for Poirot to catch it. "I don't understand what you mean," he said, voice carefully even. Poirot took a small step forward. "Ah, but you do, mon ami. You see, it is not merely the glass, nor the letter, nor the maid's panicked hiding of evidence that matters. These are all instruments." His finger traced an invisible line from the desk to the hallway, to the study, to the shadows of the house. "The true purpose has been hidden, even from those who think they watch closely." Hale frowned. "Purpose? You mean why she was killed?" Poirot's eyes glimmered with quiet intensity. "Mais oui. But not for the reasons one might first assume. Perhaps revenge? Possibly, but no. There is something far subtler, far more personal." Charles' composure faltered just slightly. A micro-expression quickly masked, but Poirot did not miss it. "You were not content to eliminate her merely for inheritance. No, you wanted her fear. Her belief that she could dictate her household, her family, even the law, until she realized she could not escape what you orchestrated." Hale's brow furrowed. "You mean psychological dominance?" Poirot inclined his head. "We observe carefully. The glass hidden returned. The postman attacked, but not fatally. The letter staged to arrive late. Each element a subtle test, each action designed to manipulate perception. He wished to see the effect of fear, confusion, and misdirection, to assert mastery not only over her life, but over the minds of all who would judge him." Charles' jaw tightened. "You exaggerate." Poirot's smile was slight, calm, but piercing. "No, monsieur, I do not exaggerate. Every detail, every action was chosen not to conceal merely the act of murder, but to command it, to demonstrate that the world bends to him, that chaos itself can be orchestrated with precision." Hale's voice rose, incredulous. "You're saying it wasn't about money at all?" "Money," Poirot said softly, "is merely the surface. Power is the mask. The true motive lies in control, the compulsion to dominate, to prove intellect and foresight, to orchestrate the fear and uncertainty of others for one's satisfaction. The murder, the letter, the attack are not ends, but means. The crime was art." Charles' hands curled into fists at his sides. "You think you understand me?" Poirot's gaze was unwavering. "I understand enough to see that you miscalculated. You believed your pattern was perfect. that your control was absolute. But human seven, the most cunning, cannot resist leaving a trace. And we have seen it. The shift in your expression when the envelope was returned, the hesitation at your arrival, the small, precise fear when confronted with the truth. Hale's voice dropped, tense. So the motive. It's not inheritance, not revenge. Pride, control? Poirot nodded. Yes. And it is that very pride which has led you to act recklessly tonight. The postman, the glass, the letter, all instruments in your psychological game. Yet even the most careful plans fail when observed by the eyes of reason. Charles' face drained of color. The mask of arrogance finally cracked, if only slightly, revealing the simmering obsession beneath. Understand. She deserved. Poirot cut him off, calm and exact. No one deserves what you have done. Your justification is nothing but a veil for obsession, and it is obsession that has betrayed you. The room was silent, the tension absolute. Hale's hand hovered near his holster, but Poirot raised a single finger. "Mon ami," he said quietly, his voice like steel wrapped in silk, "it is not our fury that will stop you. It is understanding. And now we understand completely." Charles' shoulders slumped fractionally. The air seemed to shift, as though the house itself recognized that its long-held secret was finally exposed. And at that moment it became clear. The crime had never been about the obvious, it had been about the mind behind it, and that mind had now been unmasked. Poirot stepped back from the desk, his posture calm, his mind already several moves ahead of everyone else in the room. Hale's impatience was tangible, but the inspector had begun to trust the quiet precision that radiated from the small Belgian. Every detail, every misstep by Charles Graves had been observed, catalogued, and analyzed. Now it was time. "Monsieur Graves," Poirot said, his voice soft but carrying an unyielding authority. "You have played your hand skillfully. But even the most careful of players may falter when faced with the inevitability of reason." Charles' eyes flicked toward the doorway, a faint twitch betraying his composure. "And what is this inevitability you speak of?" Poirot gestured toward the room. "Observe carefully. Every element you have touched tonight has been returned, recorded, observed. The postman, the letter, the glass, even your timing, your careful orchestration of Firol have been anticipated." He paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. "And now, monsieur, the pattern has been completed." Hale frowned. "Pattern? What do you mean, Poirot?" Poirot's gaze never left Charles. "The pattern is simple. You cannot hide from it. You act through control, through manipulation, and through fear. But control and fear require predictability. And predictability, Charles, is the enemy of secrecy." Charles' hands twitched at his sides. "Yeah, what do you intend to do?" Poirot stepped closer, carefully, deliberately. "Merely this, to allow you to confront the consequences of your own actions. I have reconstructed the timeline. I have traced the movements of every person in this house. I have accounted for each random act and calculated its significance." He reached down and lifted the returned glass, holding it between his fingers. "This was never meant to be recovered, yet it has returned. You see, you underestimated the power of observation." Charles' jaw tightened. "So this is a trap." His voice was sharp now, edged with panic. "You've set a trap for me, have you?" Poirot's smile was almost imperceptible. "Not a trap, monsieur. Revelation. You see, it is not I who ensnared wit, is your own hand, your own design. Each action, each detail, has led us to this moment." Hale's voice was tense. "And now? What happens now?" Poirot's gaze was unwavering. "Now, monsieur, you may either confess or you may attempt to flee. But understand this. Every exit, every corridor, every door has been anticipated. Escape is illusory." Charles' eyes darted toward the hallway, calculating. He was fast, clever, but Poirot had accounted for him. "You can't hold me," Charles spat, his voice rising. "You think you understand everything, but you..." Before he could finish, Poirot's hand moved subtly, a signal to Hale. In an instant, the constables who had been discreetly posted beyond the main corridor closed in. Charles froze, realizing the perimeter had been silently secured. Poirot stepped closer still. You see, monsieur, we understand the mind behind the crime. We see not only your actions, but the reasons that compelled them. It was never greed, nor inheritance, nor revenge. It was mastery control for the sake of control, and mastery, when exercised in the open, always leaves a trace. Hale drew a breath, realizing how meticulously Poirot had orchestrated this moment without firing a single gun, without brandishing any weapon, merely with the quiet power of observation and anticipation. Charles' expression finally cracked. The arrogance, the control, the pride, it all collapsed under the weight of comprehension. His shoulders slumped, and the mask of invincibility fell away. "You don't understand," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I did it, because no one could see the world as I saw it. Because I had to." Poirot's eyes softened, but not his resolve. "No, monsieur. You acted because you could not resist the compulsion to dominate, to orchestrate, to control. That, and nothing else, led to murder." The man sagged to his knees, realizing fully that the game was over. The meticulous web he had spun for months had been untangled not by brute force, but by reason, by patience, and by the smallest, most revealing details that only a keen mind could discern. Hale moved in, placing handcuffs on Charles while Poirot watched, his gaze calm but piercing. "It is finished," Poirot said quietly, almost to himself. "But let us remember, Inspector, the most dangerous criminals are not those who act for wealth, nor for vengeance, but those who act for the sake of their own mind. That is the mind we have revealed tonight." And with that, the house, the crime, and the mind behind it all were finally laid bare. The shadows of deception dissolved under the clarity of Poirot's insight, and even the deepest, most cunning trick had been unraveled with the patience and precision of a master detective. The clinking of the handcuffs against Charles Graves' wrists echoed sharply through the room, a sound that should have signified finality. Inspector Hale exhaled, finally allowing a hint of relief to escape. The postman was being tended to upstairs, the maid's tears had subsided into quiet sobs, and the house, at least superficially, seemed to have returned to order. Poirot, however, did not move to leave. He lingered beside the desk, his eyes scanning the room as if tracing invisible lines across the floorboards, the scattered papers, the returned glass. There was a subtle tension in his posture, a quiet hum of thought, and Hale noticed it immediately. "You're not satisfied?" he asked, frustration evident. "The criminal is caught. The motive exposed. What else could there possibly be?" Poirot's eyes never left the glass. "Ah, mon ami, it is never enough to accept appearances. The human mind is devious, and the cleverest criminals often leave a final whisper, a signature that speaks louder than their overt acts." He crouched slightly, touching nothing, merely observing. "Notice this, the residue upon the rim of the glass. The postman was attacked while carrying it. Yet the quantity of the substance does not match what was needed to cause immediate fatality, nor does it match the timing of death we reconstructed." Hale frowned, suddenly uneasy. "You mean?" "Yes," Poirot said softly. "Something as Simonet's been working behind even our current understanding. The true danger may not yet be behind bars." Hale's attention snapped to the maid, then to the hallway, then to the doorway where Charles had been secured. Poirot, sensing the rising tension, spoke again. "Observe carefully, Inspector. Charles Graves acted with precision, yes, but even he is a player, not the composer. Consider who had the opportunity to manipulate events before and after the crime, who had access to the letters, to the household schedule, to every person within these walls." Hale's voice was tight. "The maid?" Poirot shook his head. "No, not the maid. She acted from fear and obedience. Charles, as we have seen, acted from compulsion. But someone else orchestrated the conditions, ensured timing, ensured distraction. Someone who has observed us as much as we have observed them." A movement at the edge of the room caught Poirot's eye, a faint shuffle behind the curtain of the far window. Hale squinted, Poirot held up a hand. "Patience." Slowly, deliberately, he stepped toward the window and drew aside the heavy curtain. Behind it stood the housekeeper, pale but composed, clutching a small bundle of papers. Her lips parted, a single trembling syllable escaping. "I I thought it would never end. Hale's jaw dropped. The housekeeper? But Poirot's gaze softened, almost mournful. Yes, she was the architect of the final subtlety. Charles committed the murder, yes, and he revelled in control. Yet it was she who ensured the letters were delayed, who moved the glass when no one was watching, who orchestrated the attack on the postman to create confusion. She manipulated the perceived timeline, knowing that suspicion would fall on others first, drawing the detective's gaze along the path she designed. The housekeeper's hands shook as she offered the papers to Poirot. "It was never supposed to happen like this," she whispered. "I wanted only to protect the family secret, but I did not think anyone would die." Poirot took the papers, his fingers brushing over them with delicate precision. "Ah, you see... Mon ami," he said quietly to Hale. "Even the most intricate plan has vulnerabilities, and the genius of observation reveals what is hidden in plain sight." Charles acted with visible cunning, but the true orchestration's shadow behind the curtain was hers. Hale's mind raced, absorbing the implications. So all of Fifth Glass, the postman, the Timinget, was her design. Poirot inclined his head. Each apparent chaos, each subtle misdirection was designed to shield Charles, to manipulate perception, to delay understanding. Yet her own desire to intervene, to protect, left traces too fine for ordinary eyes, but not for mine. The housekeeper's face crumpled, her shoulders slumping under the weight of realization. "I only wanted to protect them." To protect the truth. Poirot straightened, his eyes steady, his voice calm and resolute. "And now, madam, the truth is revealed. The pattern once hidden is clear. The final move has been exposed. Justice, not only for the murder, but for the manipulation of all events, must now follow." Hale looked from Poirot to the housekeeper, then to the handcuffed Charles Graves. The house seemed impossibly still, as if even its walls were holding their breath. Poirot's gaze swept the room one last time, resting on every detail, every shadow, every object. "The case," he said quietly, "is concluded. But let us never forget, the most dangerous minds are those who act not from necessity, but from control. And control, when tested, always reveals itself." In the heavy silence that followed, it was clear the final twist had reshaped everything. The house was no longer just a crime scene, it was a testament to cunning, to observation, and to the delicate, unerring power of a mind that sees all. The house was quiet now, save for the soft rustle of papers and the distant echo of footsteps as the constables escorted Charles Graves and the housekeeper to the waiting vehicles. Outside, the wind had risen, rattling the shutters against the frame and carrying a chill that seemed to seep into every corner of the estate. Inspector Hale exhaled, tension easing slightly, yet he remained uneasy, as if the evening had not fully relinquished its grip on him. Poirot stood by the desk, surveying the scene with an almost tender scrutiny. His fingers hovered briefly over the returned glass, lingering on the faint residue, before he lifted his gaze to Hale. "You see, Inspector, what appears final is often but the surface. The events tonight, though seemingly resolved, were constructed like a complex symphony, each note intended to mislead, distract, and manipulate perception." Hale leaned against the wall, rubbing his forehead. "I still don't understand how you saw it all. Every clue seemed insignificant at the Timiach contradiction, each delayed action. I missed so much." Poirot smiled, small and wry. "Mais non, mon ami. That is precisely why observation must be patient and reason must be meticulous. The clues were never hidden, they were disguised as everyday actions. The glass, the letter, the postman's near-fatal attack, even the arrival time-sol pieces of a puzzle designed to seem accidental." Hale frowned, gesturing toward the staircase. "But the housekeeper orchestrated the final confusion. How could anyone anticipate that?" "Ah," Poirot said. "But she, like all humans, is predictable when driven by emotion. She acted to protect what she believed was precious, and in doing so left a subtle mark. The smallest tremor in her behavior, the hesitation when questioned, the careful placement of papersy betrayed her intent." He paused, allowing the gravity to settle. "Even the most cautious orchestrator cannot escape human imperfection. It is in that imperfection that justice finds its path." Hale's voice was quiet now, almost reverent. So, in the end, justice is served. Poirot's gaze drifted toward the window, where the last light of the evening caught the edge of the curtains. "We, Inspector. Justice, yes, but not without its shadow. Observe, Charles Graves has been detained, the housekeeper apprehended, and the murder explained. Yet the lesson remains: control and obsession leave traces, often invisible until one knows precisely where to look. There are no guarantees that all will act with restraint in the future. Human nature. It is flexible. Hale nodded, sensing the subtle warning. Flexible or dangerous? Poirot returned his attention to the room, touching nothing but seeing everything. The key, Inspector, lies not in what is obvious but in what is overlooked. The letter that arrived after the murder, so many assumed its timing irrelevant, yet it contained hints, subtle pressures designed to provoke fear and distraction. The glass, missing and returned, appeared trivial but was integral to understanding the postman's involvement. The smallest behavioral cues, the hesitation of a witness, the faint residue of suspenseful, of these spoke volumes to those willing to see beyond appearances. Hale's brow furrowed. "You make it sound almost artistic." Poirot allowed a small, enigmatic smile. "Ah, but crime is indeed an art, Inspector, when executed by a mind that delights in manipulation. The challenge is to discern the pattern, to distinguish the orchestrator from the mere performer. And in that challenge, one must always anticipate the final move even when the game appears won." Hale exhaled slowly. "So, tonight, we saw the orchestrator and the performer, but there could always be another, hiding in plain sight." Poirot nodded, the smile never leaving his lips. "Exactly. And that, mon ami, is why the work of the detective is never truly finished. Justice may be served, but the mind that contemplates control, the human obsession with domination, may yet remain at large. And for those of us who watch, we must always remain one step ahead." As they stepped into the corridor to follow the constables, the house seemed to sigh around them, a weight lifted yet still carrying echoes of the unseen. The crime was solved, the villain exposed, yet the subtle unease lingered, a reminder that while justice may be delivered, the shadows of human cunning can never be fully extinguished. Poirot's eyes swept the room one last time, and in that quiet vigilance he reaffirmed the eternal truth of his work. Clarity arises not from chaos, but from the unerring patience to see what others do not. The night had settled fully over the estate, the wind rustling through the trees and the distant hoot of an owl punctuating the silence. Poirot walked slowly down the gravel driveway, his hands clasped behind his back, the soft crunch of stones underfoot the only sound accompanying him. Hale followed, a few paces behind, still digesting the events that had unfolded, web of control, obsession, and psychological manipulation that had led to murder, misdirection, and the almost flawless orchestration of fear. Yet Poirot's eyes were not relaxed. They flicked to the shadows at the edges of the property, to the faint flicker of lamplight in windows that had once held secrets, and to the subtle movements of the trees swaying against the moonlit sky. There was something that did not sit entirely at rest. "Mon ami," he said quietly, his voice carrying softly over the crisp night air, "we have solved the murder, identified the orchestrators, revealed the motive, and ensured justice, at least the semblance of it. And yet—" He let the word linger, drawing Hale's attention. Hale frowned. "Yet what, Poirot? Do you doubt your deductions?" Poirot shook his head slightly, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Not doubt, no. Mise. Curiosity. Observation is a discipline of detail. Even now there is one tiny anomalismal, almost imperceptible, but it calls to me." He bent slightly to pick up a fallen leaf, turning it over between his fingers as though it were a clue rather than a scrap of nature. The postman's pocket watch placed carelessly on the table before the attack was wound differently than it should have been for the time of his arrival. A triviality, you might say, yet perhaps an intentional signal, a message disguised as accident. Who might have noticed? Who might have intended it? Hale glanced at the distant house, the windows darkened, and the forms of the detained lying quietly in the back. "You think there's more?" Poirot's gaze lifted to the sky. "Mais oui. Not another murder, perhaps, but a thread that continues. The mind that orchestrates is rarely content with a single act. Even in chains, even under observation, subtle influence remains. A letter, a gesture, a hidden communication. It may seem innocent, yet it carries intent, and I am convinced that someone has left such a trace, a minor puzzle waiting for the discerning eye. Hale exhaled, a mixture of awe and fatigue. It never ends with you, does it? Poirot's smile broadened, a soft, enigmatic curve. Ah, mon ami, that is the delight of our profession. The detective's work is never truly finished. One uncovers the visible, explains the immediate, but the shadows remain. There is always another pattern, another motive, another mind to reveal. They walked on in silence for a few moments, the gravel crunching underfoot, and the distant silhouettes of the trees stretching long and wavering. Poirot stopped, turning to Hale, his expression serene yet piercing. You see, every case leaves a residue not merely of evidence, but of subtle impression. A word misremembered, a glance misread, a delay unexplained. These are the seeds of the next mystery. And those who are observant, patient, and precise will see them blossom when others have long passed by. Hale shook his head, half in disbelief, half in admiration. So, even with justice served, there's still a question left hanging. Poirot nodded slowly, his gaze sweeping the darkened house one final time. Always, mon ami, always. The mind that conceives the extraordinary is rarely satisfied with finality, and for the detective, that is both a burden and a gift. We solve one puzzle only to find another waiting quietly in the shadows, teasing, whispering, daring us to discover it. A faint breeze stirred, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant blossoms, rustling the leaves at their feet. Poirot straightened, lifted his chin, and allowed the night to embrace them both. And so we leave, not with closure complete, but with vigilance awakened. For the mystery never truly ends. It merely waits for the next observer, the next mind, to see what has been hidden all along. Hale followed silently as Poirot walked toward the edge of the driveway, the faint outline of the horizon just beginning to lighten with the promise of dawn. Behind them, the estate remained quiet, yet somewhere inside, subtle signs of life-off secrets, yet to reveal themselves, lingered in the shadows. And in that quiet anticipation, the detective's work, as always, continued one step ahead of the unseen, one mind alert to the whispers of the next mystery that would inevitably emerge.